It's been almost a month since we sent a camera down to the Challenger Deep, a part of the wider Mariana Trench. There's not much money in deep sea exploration, but it has always been a passion project for us. Thankfully, it seems to be that way for some wealthier individuals too, and we were finally able to secure funding for an extensive and expensive mapping of the deep sea floor and the species that inhabit the waters there. The camera uses a combination of echolocation to detect both land formations and moving targets and their size, and a light to be able to capture them on film. The project proved to be a success, and during our first week we managed to see a frilled shark, a vampire squid, and even a glass octopus. We took turns watching the footage, although most of the time one person watching quickly turned into four, since none of us could stand the thought of missing something exceptional. A little over a week ago, however, I was alone. It had been an uneventful few days, since we were exploring the deepest part of the trench, and at over 10 kilometers deep, there weren't many creatures to encounter. The only reason we even bothered to spend so much time there was to map the land formations. Suddenly, I was awakened from my thoughts by the beep of the monitor as it detected something moving. I looked up and almost fell from my chair. What it was detecting was roughly the size of an apartment building. I shouted for my colleagues and took over the controls by hand, trying to steer the camera towards whatever was emitting the signal. It was moving away from us, so I decided to shoot my shot and turn the light on. Maybe we'd catch a glimpse. At first, there was nothing, but then something flashed across the left corner of the screen. That's a fucking fin! Or a tail! Dan said in disbelief. Natalie was squinting at the screen.
Was it a whale?
Whatever it was, I said. It's gone now. The radar had gone silent. If it was a whale, this would be the discovery of the century, Dan said. That's over 10 kilometers deep. John shook his head. There is no way that was a whale.
Well, what do you suggest then? A fucking Loch Ness monster?
How stupid do you think I am, Nat? John said with feigned annoyance. I was obviously going to say Godzilla. Despite our imminent disbelief, we agreed that it was probably some kind of a whale, and that we should stay in the area to confirm the sighting. Maybe there's some fame to be gained from this after all. Dan laughed. A fucking whale in the Mariana Trench. Days went by and nothing happened. We almost started to feel like what we saw was just some shared hallucination, born from our boredom and desire to find something remarkable. But just when we were about to lose all hope and return to more shallow waters, it happened again. This time, the enormous being was coming towards us at full speed. Right away, as the light turned on, we saw something that froze us on our seats. It was an eye. followed by sharp, anglerfish-like teeth, and then something that might have been a fin but looked disturbingly much like a hand. After that, everything went dark, and the camera stopped responding. Dan broke the silence. "I think it hit the camera with its tail," he said.
What the fuck was that?
Natalie said, without taking her eyes off the black screen. "It kind of looked like an anglerfish," John said. Dan shook his head in disbelief. "Yeah, a 13-meter long anglerfish." I sat silent, pondering whether I should bring up what I think I saw, even at the risk of sounding absolutely batshit crazy. Ultimately, I decided that the situation was crazy anyway, so I might as well just come clean. "This is gonna sound stupid," I started, "but did you guys see a hand?" Everyone was staring at me silently. "Yeah," John said in a quiet voice. Natalie nodded her head. The next few days was spent on how we should bring up news of the camera break-in with Kaito, our funder. Our contract also stated that we should inform him of all the discoveries we make. I think we were all pretty shaken up, but we managed to keep our wits about us by focusing on the task at hand. The general consensus was that we had to tell him the truth. He might think we were losing our minds, but at least then there was a chance, however slim, that we could continue our exploration. It's not like he would just buy us a new $10,000 camera if we said we crashed it into a rock. The fateful day came, and with it Kaito, to visit our research station. He seemed to sense something was off right away and demanded an explanation for the 2 days of missing updates. We explained to him what happened and everything we saw, fully expecting him to storm out or laugh at us. To our surprise, all he said was a simple "where?" 10.6 kilometers from the surface, I said. "No, I mean exact coordinates for both encounters," he said in a grave yet weirdly excited tone. We gave the coordinates to Kaito. He thanked us and started to leave. Before he made his way to the door, Dan stopped him to ask him if we could continue with our project. "No, there's no need," Kaito said, and disappeared out the door before any of us could protest. We were defeated. After all this time, we had nothing to show for our troubles. No hope of starting over. Our equipment was laying at the bottom of the ocean with all of our precious footage. Still, none of us wanted to go home, since that would mean admitting it was over. A week went by as we desperately tried to get the camera to work again. Then, everything changed. Kaito called us and asked us to come meet him at his research station in Umatak, a village in Guam. We happily agreed, thinking that he had had a change of mind about discontinuing our operation. We travelled there the same afternoon. At the door, we were greeted by Kaito's assistant and 4 NDAs. We didn't think much of it, since a research facility in the middle of nowhere probably wasn't the most public place in the world. I acknowledge I'm breaking mine by telling you all of this, but what we saw there simply cannot be kept a secret. Once inside, we were greeted by Kaito and led along a corridor to a room that looked more like a hangar than a laboratory. At the other side of the hall, there was a huge tank full of water. It took up most of the room, and it was impossible to say how far it actually stretched. And then I saw what was in it. It was about the size of a blue whale, with a tail resembling a fish's, except for jellyfish-like tentacles spraying out from it. Higher up, the tail turned into something resembling a torso with long, spindly hands protruding from it. They were covered with the same tentacles as the tail. The whole thing was almost completely see-through, and I could see its organs squirming inside. I forced myself to look at its face and saw anglerfish like a mouth with needle-sharp, unevenly scattered teeth penetrating the ghostly flesh of its gums. The eyes were small, at least compared to its size, and completely white, staring at us emptily. A shiver ran across my back. I have never felt so small in my entire life as I did standing next to the towering creature. One single tooth was the same size as me. It could devour every single one of us without even noticing. That was what scared me the most. The idea that this thing could destroy us with no malice, no acknowledgement. We were to it like ants are to us. Small, insignificant beings being trampled as we make our way through our everyday lives.
"That's a pressurized tank," Kaito said, while we stared at it in awe. "Take it out of there, and it collapses on itself. Almost died in transport. The thing can't survive at normal air pressure."
"What is it?" I asked, without taking my eyes off the tank.
"It's a mermaid,"
Kaito said, and laughed. "Or as close to that as we're going to get." Kaito explained to us that the whole reason he funded our expedition was to find this creature and capture it. He had always been obsessed with mermaids, sure that somewhere, deep beneath the surface of the sea, they truly existed. As it turns out, he was right. Questions flowed out of us like seawater from the mouth of someone saved from drowning. Kaito could tell us very little about the creature, only that it was around 130 years old. Probably a predator based on its looks, and almost completely blind.
"It probably uses some kind of sound waves to see in the dark. Maybe to communicate too. I'm planning on measuring those soon,"
Kaito said. He promised he could tell us more in a few weeks, since he would have finished most of the tests by then. He offered to let us stay at the station until then, as long as we promised not to disturb him. In fact, no one was to come inside the hall where Ningyo, as Kaito had named the creature, was held. We left and he locked himself in. Needless to say, none of us got much sleep that night, whether it was out of excitement, fear, or a combination of both. That was 2 weeks ago. Today, we are going back. I don't know what we're about to learn, but whatever it is, I believe is going to change the way we look at other life forms. I'm terrified to step inside that room, yet it's the only thing that feels worthwhile in this life. I'll update you as soon as I get back. Hopefully, with some new discoveries. I'm sorry it's been so long. Every day I've been staring at my computer, wanting to tell someone about what I saw, but unable to do so. At night I dream of Ningyo and wake up in a cold sweat. And every time I wake up, I feel closer to her, like she's pulling me towards her, little by little. As you can imagine, I haven't really been able to do anything but think of that day, of what happened to Kaito. Except, when I think about it, it feels like all of it happened to me instead. We walked into the lab, and it was clear right away that Kaito had been working around the clock. His usually immaculate appearance had moved aside to reveal disheveled hair, unshaved beard, and dark eye bags that accentuated the mad look in his eyes.
She's amazing. I look at her and I see true beauty. Something ancient, unchanged by times and life above ground,
Kaito said, and beckoned us to come closer. We obeyed, although a bit taken aback by the uncharacteristic passion in his voice. Kaito was standing in front of a computer placed just a few meters from the tank, which was dark, and the creature nowhere to be seen.
I turned the lights off,
Kaito said, noticing us staring into the darkness.
I think it relaxes her.
It sure as hell didn't relax me, but I kept my mouth shut. Kaito was frantically typing something into the computer.
There are speakers inside the tank. Ningyo responds to sound waves. The higher the frequency, the better. He pressed a button, took a few steps back.
There was movement in the tank, a faint glow that seemed to be getting closer. Then the teeth, then a pair of eyes, and finally, I could see the whole head. I realized the glow was emitting from a small light dangling above its eyes.
It has an Esker, I said to Kaito. I didn't see that before. It's retractable, he answered. It only comes out when she wants to use it.
Wonder why she feels the need to use it right now,
Natalie muttered to herself. Kaito just smiled without lifting his eyes from the screen. His obvious comfort around the thing was a bleak contrast to our tense selves, but I guess you can get used to about everything.
I'm sending out a series of sounds through the speaker and she's responding, Kaito said. Come look at this.
On the computer, there was a graph. I figured it showed the frequency of sound Ningyo was emitting. It looked weirdly clean. The rises and falls symmetrical, and pulses of sound neatly grouped together. She's emitting sounds that range from about 100 kHz to 100 MHz. They're inaudible to the human ear, but thankfully we have computers for that, Kaito said, clearly excited. Look, at the number of the pulses. Does that remind you of anything? It's the Fibonacci sequence, isn't it? Dan asked. Kaito looked pleased. Yes, it varies how long it goes on before starting over, but the formula is always the same, he said, eyes glowing. At first, 2 single pulses with a break in between. Then 2 in a cluster. Then 3 and so on. You know how it goes. We were all staring at the computer in awe. To find something so commonly found in nature in a being that seems so unnatural should have been comforting, but somehow it disturbed me even more. This meant that it wasn't just a mistake. Something twisted, born in the dark waters. No. It was a product of evolution, just like you and me. I shuddered at the thought of what else might have developed down there. John broke the silence with a question that was in all of our minds. What does it eat? Honestly, it's more of a question of what she doesn't eat, Kaito said. The being this big, she can't really be picky if she wishes to survive in a place where there's so little to survive on. Ningyo is omnivorous. My guess is probably cannibalistic too.
So there's more of them?
It was more of a statement than a question. I think so, Kaito said, smiling. In fact, I'm almost positive there are. But the most interesting part isn't what she eats, it's how she does it. I'll show you. He typed something into his computer again, and a hatch opened at the side of the tank, releasing a herd of fish. They swam in various directions, lost and trying to make sense of their surroundings. Ningyo was staring at them hungrily, and I was waiting for it to pounce any second. Why isn't it attacking? I asked Kaito. She's an ambush predator, sort of, he responded. Dan scoffed. An ambush predator? It's the size of a fucking building. Just wait. Ningyo was still staring at the fish in front of it. But then I realized that the fish were staring back. They weren't fleeing anymore. Not even moving. He floated completely still, in a wedge-like formation that did not look natural. Then, Ningyo opened its jaws, and the fish just started to swim into the huge mouth waiting in front of them, calmly. Without ever breaking from the group, they just allowed themselves to be devoured. Did the fish really not see it? Dan asked, eyes wide. They do, Kaito said happily. They're going willingly.
What the hell do you mean willingly?
Natalie asked. I think the voices Ningyo emits somehow change their behavior, Kaito said. That's how she hunts. You're telling us this thing is telekinetic now? I asked in disbelief. Kaito laughed. If you want to put it like that, then yeah.
Why is it here, Kaito?
Natalie asked, without taking her eyes off of Ningyo. Kaito smiled at us.
The more I spend time with her, the more I understand myself. I was blind before, driven by pride, money, and insignificant pleasures. I thought I could bend the world to my will, and this was just a small part of it. Kaito was staring at the distance. It seemed like he was talking to himself more than us. Have you heard of the legend that consuming the flesh of a mermaid, Ningyo, gives you eternal youth? We hadn't. I used to believe in it. That was the main reason I started looking for her, and don't get me wrong, I wasn't completely mistaken, just a little blind to the truth. It's not the act of consuming Ningyo's flesh that gives you these powers. In fact, that doesn't even work. He paused and smiled at us. The important part isn't eating her, it's becoming one with her, a part of something greater. Do you understand what I mean? We didn't. And we were honestly a bit scared of Kaito. His eyes looked different. Not just because of the lack of sleep, but there was something empty in them. The way Kaito was looking at the tank seemed awfully familiar to the way the fish were staring at Ningyo just moments ago. He seemed lost in thought, and suddenly he just started walking towards a door on the other side of the room. We called for him, asked where he was going, but he didn't answer. There was something wrong with him, Natalie said, sounding worried. Should we follow him? I asked. Before we could come to a decision, there was movement in the tank. The hatch on the side of the tank opened again. But instead of fish, it was Kaito that pushed himself through the small hole and into the water. He stopped moving, just floated there, the pressure pushing on him, twisting his face and limbs in a way that was hard to watch, yet it was impossible to look away. We stared in panicked awe as Ningyo started approaching. It moved slowly, almost like it was just floating towards Kaito, never breaking eye contact. It stopped in front of him and, just as before, opened its mouth. Kaito started to swim towards it. With his last strength, he treaded the water in a desperate attempt to move forward, finally reaching the mouth waiting in front of him. Kaito reached for one of the enormous teeth and dragged himself inside. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably just a few seconds, Ningyo closed its mouth and Kaito disappeared from view. Blood stained the water red. I still see those blood-red waters whenever I close my eyes. After Ningyo ate Kaito, we just stood there, silent, without looking at each other, without courage to neither approach the tank nor leave. I've been trying to tell myself I was imagining it, but after eating Kaito, there was something different about Ningyo. Something in her eyes had changed. There was something more intelligent, more human in the way she looked at us. Something akin to the intense passion I saw in Kaito just minutes ago. Finally we left, but still didn't speak of what we saw. Still haven't. All of this has been consuming my thoughts for the last month, and I see no other way out of this. I think I have to go back there. But before that, I need all of you to know there's something else down there. Something that can only be described as other. It's strange, and it's beautiful, and it's terrifying.
It's an inevitable product of evolution in a world that likes to think we are where all evolution leads and stops.